In the name of God Almighty, the most gracious, the most merciful, on behalf of Dr. Jamal Sanad Al-Suwaidi, Director General of the ECSSR, I would like to welcome you. We meet this evening to attend the lecture entitled The Challenges of the Civil State in the Arab and Muslim Worlds, held by Rashid Saleh Al-Araimi. He was the editor-in-chief of the Al-Ittihad newspaper from April 2007 until February 2013. He holds a bachelor's degree in administration from the National American University, Colorado. He started his professional career in media upon joining Abu Dhabi TV in 1986. He also previously served head of the Studies and Information Center at Al-Ittihad, as well as executive managing editor and the head of the Studies Department as well. He was appointed the inaugural Secretary General of the Sheikh Zayed Book Award. He also participated in a number of national, regional, international conferences and is currently a media advisor at the Crown Prince Court. Sir, you have the floor. Assalamu alaikum. May the peace of God be upon you. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you for your presence. And all the thanks goes to the ECSSR, in particular Dr. Jamal Sanad Al-Suwaidi, who has honored me with this invitation to talk to you. And definitely I will benefit the most due to your own questions and discussions. The issue of the civil state in our Islamic and Arab world is a very complicated subject. We can take several paths in this discussion, but in this study I have the remarks given to me by the book The Mirage, written by Dr. Jamal Sanad Al-Suwaidi, where several windows are being given for discussion. The terminology of the civil state is the most used during the uprisings and the revolutions of what was called the Arab Spring. Those who demonstrated against ruling regimes, regime supporters, intellectuals, and academics from different social and political backgrounds, religious scholars, Islamist activists, and others. They all used the terminology of the national state upon writing their demands related to the establishment of a new political system and a new social contract in their own societies. Similar to any concept used in this way, the notion of the civil state has become a floating signifier. It was used in developing several ideas related to the relationship between the ruler and the ruled, justice, security, good governance, and the relationship between religion and the state. The idea of the civil state is a prevalent feature of public debates in the Arab world almost 2 decades ago. It was adopted by Islamist movements and intellectuals, secular leftists, and liberal parties, and intellectual currents as well. In other words, the idea of the two traditional rival blocs was adopted, which adds to those who really resist this idea a problem, according to Dr. Salam Ibrahim, about this subject in particular, published by this center. If we go back to this date, since the establishment of the national state in the Arab world, after the direct occupation, Western occupation, we find that most Arab countries, no matter what the regime is, which it adopted, or the ideology which it presumed civility, whereas long-term experience really showed the failure of these countries. The events of the Arab Spring at the beginning of this decade disclosed this failure. The main demands used to talk about the establishment of a modern state in different aspects and what this means of a new social contract. What was called the Arab Spring regarding achieving these demands for the public were in vain. The Arabs in the countries that had what is what's called the Arab Spring lost a new opportunity to build a modern state. The spring itself turned either into a very harsh wind or a desperate spring. The question remains about lost opportunities, about building a modern world. Most importantly, why the civil country is failing to build a modern state, which means what are the challenges that hinder the establishment of a civil state in the Arab world. These questions emanate from the political and societal movements occurring all over the Arab world, make of it the most present, whether when it comes to the political elites or the public. Salim Ibrahim, Fuad Ajmi, Muhammad al-Haddad, and Sa'ad Ibrahim and others decide that. And the attempt to answer these questions demands certain repetition of the big issues which really dominated the intellect of the Arabs, such as the relationship between the religion and the state and otherwise. In an attempt to try to really answer these questions, allow me to discuss or to divide this study into three main things. I shall try to really draw a distinction or outline the concept of the civil state and draw a distinction between other concepts that are often directly associated with the notion of the civil state, as illustrated by the way in which the terms secular state and civil state are used with accompanying Islamic references. The second focuses on the missed opportunities for the establishment of the civil state in the Arab world from the second half of the 20th century onwards. Finally, I shall analyze the current challenges that prevent the construction of a modern civil state in the Arab and Islamic worlds. In the understanding or concept of the civil state, which emanated in the studies of the intellectuals about the state itself, which it is based on accomplishing its own rights in a society where there are certain ethical concepts. The concept of the civil state is not only a political product, it is different aspects in the framework of knowledge, politics, society, and economy. It goes back to before Anno Domini, and they see that the rulers of the countries of the Greeks, the first philosophers throughout history, have written the theory of the civil state to be an establishment that really hinder the authority of hegemony on the Greek society for so long. The modern state, the country has taken a different aspect upon being established over the hegemony of the church. This new state assures the freedom on the hands of philosophers, which really who are promoting the idea of the civil state, such as Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Hobbes and others. The division of authorities emanating from the concepts of civil society has emerged. John Locke developed this idea. He put the ideas of the modern society where there is justice, and establishing an authority which implements this law to really preserve the lives of the people and their proprieties and freedoms through the mandatory or voluntary acceptance between all its members. Jean-Jacques Rousseau came to develop the idea of Jean-Luc about the social contract, which turned into making the will of the society a main thing to choose the ruler, and therefore made the will of the society over all wills, and therefore Jean-Jacques Rousseau put the basics of the civil society, which deals with all its members with equality in the framework of law and democratic principles, where the people is the highest authority in choosing its own rulers and laws. The most important concept of the law based on the mechanism of resorting to social contract, which needs respect and commitment, mutual commitment between all members of the society without exception. As for the rules, freedoms, obligations, and others, whether financially or otherwise, with the emanation of the French Revolution, they put the civil state as a basics for the rule, and thereafter a number of countries followed suit until it arrived to the Arab world, which is really constantly in conflict between the lack of understanding of the religious currents and trying to really get this concept for the service of its own objectives. The idea of the civil society is based on democracy and equality in obligations, the respect of values, cooperation for mutual life. We are talking about tribal issues and so on. The civil state, as Hassan Hanafi sees it, is based on the plurality of the political aspects and the culture of understanding and dialogue and the service of the public service. The understanding of the civil society is based on the idea of citizenship and the principle of tolerance. This citizenship mentions that all members of the society in this civil society are considered equal citizens in obligations legally, and regardless of their own religious or ethnic belongings, or the gender, or the societal belongings, and so on and so forth. As for the principle of tolerance, it insinuates the tolerance of the state towards different societal and political forces alike, and the state shouldn't be really a part of any conflict as decided by Heinz and others. The system of the state in a civil society or in a civil state is based on the rule of law, whether the state is republic, presidential, parliamentary, or otherwise forms of the rule, and the people is considered the source of the authorities. It expresses its own opinion through really nominating its own representatives in a transparent way. To distinguish between the three authorities on the main aspects of the rule, the civil state system gives the public freedoms in the framework of law, and the rule is owned by civilians representing the people, meaning that the state is not governed by religious men or military men. It is, at least, it's not a religious or a theocratic country or military country. The civil state is based on a civil culture, which depends on the mind and the freedom of mankind, plurality in perspectives, and freedom in perspectives as well. Perhaps the establishment of the understanding in the Arab world of the civil state to avoid this complication of the terminology of the civil state and all the disagreements faced by the religious current and public opinion in the Arab world in general, in addition to the negative experience for the systems of the Arab regimes which called itself Arabic since the beginning of the independence. Perhaps the terminology of the civil state in the Arab world used to really represent the historical concordance to get out of the conflict between the caliphate state or the secular state, which is decided by Muhammad al-Haddad, Zawaini, and Salim Ibrahim. Despite that the civil state is facing the other state, it is not really relinquishing the religious aspect. When it started the project of the civil state in the framework of modernity in the West, religion has been put aside without any ignorance, as said by Bassem Khaisat, meaning the understanding and the concept of the civil state does not keep these religious currents of really practicing their own activities. This does not mean that the civil state now has become a religious reference as promoted by the members of the political Islam currents, in addition to the lack of any agreement between all those people about the meaning of the religious reference. This religious reference does not differ at all in its gist about what is going on at the moment in Iran, for instance, amidst the reference of Wilayat al-Faqih, and opposes all the systems of the democratic regime, and the civil state turns into the caliphate state or religious state as seen by Jamal al-Suwaidi, Wahid al-Majid, and Saladin Ibrahim, and others. As for the lost opportunities to develop and establish a civil state in the Arabic world, the Arabs had 3 opportunities to establish a modern civil state, but these opportunities were lost. The first opportunity came after the independence and building the national state in the mid of the past century, as mentioned by Fuad Ajami. But what happened was that the Arabic countries, as taken forms of the regime, they met to really fail in reaching the gist of the civil society based on democracy, and resorted to achieving the objectives of certain groups and people, and not what achieves the really interests of the citizens. Salim Ibrahim sees that really understanding the idea of modernity upon the Arab elites and being marginalized for most of the people, and the lack of certain strategic directives for the issue of modernization and having certain regimes in most of the Arab countries, all these failed in establishing an Arab modern state, true Arab modern state, since the establishment of, or the beginnings of the 19th century onwards. This has led to the establishment of the Islamic Renaissance in the past centuries, with its own slogan, Islam is the solution, and calling to achieve Islamic regimes as an expression of their failure in trespassing this failure, of course. This was another opportunity in establishing a modern Islamic state in the late 80s and early 90s, with the follow-up of the international changes regarding the end of the Cold War and the disintegration of the Soviet Union and the establishment of the globalization. The Arab countries did not really see these changes and have disregarded what's going on, thinking that they are really away from all of this, and they would have been able to really change away from the military regimes, as happened in Latin America and East Europe, where all these changes have been realized through the establishment of civil states or something similar, whereas the Arabic countries have stopped dealing with these changes. With the revolutions of the Arab world, there was a third opportunity to establish a civil society or a civil state in a number of Arabic countries, but this opportunity has been lost as well. All these uprisings and revolutions has turned either into a civil war or armed conflict, and the Islamists has really put these regimes as a first step to build their own ambition regarding the caliphate state and achieving their objectives. All these revolutionaries has turned either really into groups that hate each other meaning what was said as the Arab world did not really turn into a true change in the gist of the Arabic countries, as Tariq Masoud has written, and Mr. Ibrahim. As for the framework of building the challenges of a civil state in both Arabic and Islamic worlds, this opportunity really faces all challenges built or emanating from the movements of the Islamic movements, which really refuses the disintegration of authorities and sees, according to the interpretations of the legislators in the 6th century Hijra, that Islam is for all times, without going back to the developments going on worldwide. Science has trespassed what is after modernity, whereas the political Islam is really adopting interpretations of texts from the 6th Hijra aspect. And we understand that the political Islamists headed by the Muslim Brotherhood in opposition or in the ruling party want to Islamize the society according to their own concept of Islam. Through either through desire or through fear, or instilling fear, or through mandatory aspects. And anyone who is different than them, they do not see this person the importance of the values and the behaviors which should be planted in the society. And this mandatory Islamization might lead to violence or really confronting religion. And for this political really speech has really shown, due to the long experience, the effect on the popular movement. This speech remains undemocratic and unpluralistic, that does not accept what is different and incapable of really taking heed of the citizens who are different in their ethnicities and so on and so forth, as mentioned by François Bourga in his book about political Islam. François Bourga is one of the experts in the Islamic movements. He has a very important book which is called Political Islam, The Voice of the South. It has been published in 1993, translated also into Arabic. Perhaps the most dangerous threat, political threat for the civil state, is that it assumes the allegiance that trespasses the borders of the civil state, which really has no meaning whatsoever. The Islamists refuses, especially the Muslim Brotherhood, the idea of the nation when it comes out of principle. Of course, they are keen on establishing an Islamic system represented by the Caliphate, Islamic Caliphate. The experiences of the countries that experienced these revolutions of what is called the Arab Spring, especially Tunisia, Egypt, is a good example of this. The second challenge upon the establishment of a civil society, modern civil society, takes heed of the nature of the political systems in the Arabic world since the independence, which did not differ at all. It's just even it has different forms because it has been established, these systems, conservative systems, after the political independence all over the Arabic world. All this has contributed in the failure of different attempts to establish a true Arabic Renaissance since the beginning of the 19th century, as I mentioned previously onwards. Perhaps the most dangerous of what these Arabic societies has done is to promote these opposing currents. Some of the countries and some of the systems have taken heed of these religious currents and really promoted this Islamic popular aspects in fighting the other secular currents, which want also the authorities. These systems and regimes thought that depending on these religious currents might really disintegrate or other secular aspects. This failure in the establishment of the civil state goes to the culture. What we see of Arabic systems is not the result of today, as Al-Jabiri and Al-Safadi mentioned. It is the birth of an old old culture, which has really established a complete methodology. Perhaps it is difficult to get rid of this methodology in the framework of the presence of a popular reference in all the Arabic and Islamic worlds. This thing is considered one of the most dangerous causes which has really plagued the Arabic regimes, changed the plurality that accepts the other. This spirit is considered one of the bases of the Arabic intellect. It is not new as many see it. It cannot really be solved unless in light of understanding the intellect, Arabic intellect. This is what Muhammad Abd al-Jabri has spoken about in his book Takwin al-Alam al-Arabi, the establishment of the Arabic world. So ignorance and not dialogue is part of the Arabic culture. Al-Jabri has really spoken of the track and the journey of this culture. He has given examples of this culture and the opposing culture, which does not work on dialogue or discussion. It works on destroying each other through really different roles that they're playing. The culture adopted by the authority is the hegemonic culture and works on dialogue and going away from discussing the other idea or the other intellect. And the failure of the phenomena of the country and its basis is a societal responsibility where everyone is participating or part of this responsibility. Studies has shown that the individual sense with the absence of certain authorities leads to the refusal of democracy. This is what Al-Tahir Labib spoken about in a seminar on democracy and an intervention where he shows the negative role played by the leftists in democracy and its concept and standing. Arabs live today a state of presumption and chaos on both the intellectual and political levels. Decades have been lost in the framework of ideological leftist or other Islamic systems, hegemonic in general, without really establishing the modern state. When they were surprised with what is called the Arab Spring, the political Islam came back to the forefront. It has been supported by the Westerns and otherwise. These movements has proven that it is still living in the first centuries, incapable of dealing with the society in its own ethnicities and demands. It did not really benefit from the failed experience of the past. It is as bad as it was the others, and this popular movement was in its beginning. The presence of these Islamic currents have left because it denied the pragmatism and the perspectives of the West. It decided to really cancel the other and Islamize the society, and it showed for the Islamic society that their promises are only mirage, as decided by Dr. Jamal Sanad al-Suwaidi. In reality, the issue of really presuming to merge religion with the state is behind the failure of the Islamists in really going forward with modernity. Their promises turned into mirage. Al-Suwaidi mentions that the disintegration of the state and the religion, the state is not a religion or a state or a society. It's a number of people, individuals, institutions, and so on. To really merge between both makes religion suffer, and also the society. This understanding really improves the religious idea. Other than anything else, religion should stay in its own transparency and integrity and never enters into the maze of politics. End of quote. The call of making religion as transparent as possible wasn't new, but a reading to really criminalize these currents in failing to establish a modern state and not being able to offer a different methodology of the dictatorships after the arrival of the Islamists to the regime. Their behavior did not differ at all. The Islamists came with this identity and the Islamic program to to the raid in Iran and Sudan and Afghanistan and Turkey and Egypt and Tunisia. In all these experiences, the Islamists have proven themselves that they have interests only use religion to reach their own interests. Now, Arabs, would they go back to the military systems, military regimes, hegemonic regimes? Of course not, because these forms of systems have failed in the establishment of a state and establishing civil societies that are based on equality, in addition to the failure of democracy and plurality. The civil state is the alternative or the solution between the secular state and the religious state or the caliphate state. The understanding of the civil state trespasses the secular state in the issue of religion and keeps the religion its own space, socially, without really interfering in managing politics. In this framework, Jamal Suwaidi says that there is a need to really disintegrate religion and state. It is considered a sign of improvement and modernity, not because religion is a sign of backwardness, but modernity needs to change the humanitarian intellect in a practical way. Modernism is a very difficult operation and interrelated. Suwaidi really gives systems of Islamic states which has been able to really divide between what is religion and what is politics. They haven't said that they have divided between both in a matter that really bothers the society and the Islamists. And the experience that they are offering, they are trying to put certain ramifications for those who are trying to find forms of the state. Some of the Islamic countries, other Arab countries, of course, in particular Indonesia, Malaysia, and Turkey, to really divide between what is religion and politics without really getting rid of religion as a system that where people live in and being able to go forward with the era that we are living in. And of course, despite the challenges of building or establishing a modern state where we have really spoke about, implies on the Islamic countries, very few of them were able to face these challenges and succeed in different layers in establishing a modern state. The examples offered by Al-Suwaidi in his book, according to Turkey, Indonesia, and Malaysia, offer really samples of these countries and common denominator that they were able to get out of these problems, where a number of Arabs and Muslims also have been facing the problems of religion and state legitimacy and modernity and tradition. They were able to develop their own economy by getting the experiences of the world and benefiting from the experiences, traditional experiences. They were able to really compete in other markets. Most importantly, that these countries have been able, with very good insight, to not have religion being or interfering in the country, knowing that religion is constant and politics is a variable, and it succeeded in building or establishing modern states which take heed of the citizens without really interfering in so many different things and so many different people and societal aspects, as if the country has created a nation for everyone, all ethnicities, all groups, without any neutrality or anything else. And this is the main gist of the idea of citizenship, which is the main aspect in a civil society or a civil state. Most importantly, that these countries has taken as democracy, and in different degrees and levels, in its own political systems. In addition to this transparency, civil state is based on citizenship, which is the legal equality between all citizens. Democracy as a state or a system of ruling in its liberal form. The civil state, which really excludes the participation of religious men and military men in the system. And no doubt that the current Arabic situation, with all its problems and challenges, is in dire need of taking these principles to build a modern civil society. It is facing the disintegration of the Arabic regime in its entirety. In this regard, the Arabic Gulf countries are not an exception of the other states, Arab states, in the field of establishing a modern state. What is worthy mentioning that the UAE has stepped so far in building a modern state, and the indicators are more than you can count in these small minutes that we have. We mention the innovation really presented by the political leadership between the Islamic tradition and the values of modernity. Also, they merged both together. They have given interest in the symbol of our own civilization, taking care of a culture and Islamic tradition, and it has stepped so many steps in really moving forward with the economy according to international standards and really promoting the infrastructure, and it has achieved so many things compared also to other Western countries. Dr. Khattar, the political science professor, sees that the political leadership in the UAE believes in the civility of the state that does not really merge between religion, which has all the respect as a basis for everyone, for the citizens, and the belief, and between practicing it politically in the public sector. In conclusion, the civil state has different interpretations, but all these interpretations says that it is a country that really protects all the members of the society and preserves its rights, regardless of their ethnicities and intellect, on the basis of the law, democracy, plurality, tolerance, and citizenship. And it is noticed the really increase of talking about this thing after the Arab Spring, and those who are really understanding this concept, regardless of the difference in their understandings, whether they are religious currents, especially when it comes to talking about the reference of the state. I hope that I haven't spoken a lot, and I have really spoken thoroughly about this subject. Thank you for your kind attention. May the peace of God be upon you.
شكرا للأستاذ راشد العريمي على هذه المحاضرة.
Thank you, Mr. Rashid Al-Araimi. We open the door now for Q&A. Kindly, those who want to ask a question, stand up, introduce yourselves, and be brief. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Industrial state, a world leader, a state which plays on the world stage there. There's certain principles, or you could say nature of law, which requires to be followed. One of them is basically transparency, following the rule of law, and basically having a set of principles, beliefs, or even ideology, which is comprehensive, so that when a state wants to solve a problem or an issue, it always refers to that same ideology, instead of having a mishmash of different ideas, which results in a mishmash state there. And this ideology has to be believed by the mass of people within the state. So if you look at Europe, you find that their beliefs, their ideas came from their history, from their ideas, from their ideology. They are willing to spend time, money, effort, and even die for that belief. It appears that we are copy-pasting again ideologies, beliefs which are in contradiction with the beliefs of the people within the Arab and Muslim world. Do you feel that this will be a problem? Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا أستاذ راشد على هذه المحاضرة.
Thank you.
طيبة. سؤالي بالنسبة للتحقيق لكي تتحقق الدولة المدنية.
To achieve the civil state, There should be stability and security. How can we achieve this modern civil state? And we are living in a long conflict with the Arab-Israeli conflict on one hand, and on the other hand, the foreign interferences and Western interferences. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا لكم.
Thank you. As to the first question, transparency and ideology that the people believe in. I expect that most of the Arab countries and Islamic countries, the people is divided in its belief in ideology. There is a conflict between the Islamic groups that have certain values. On the other hand, there are the liberals and the seculars and the leftists. And all parties have their own supporters. Perhaps the civil state or this terminology being discussed in this framework needs to be really agreed upon by all parties. The difference really is shown when some try to get out of the history and go back to the 6th Hijra civilization with all its texts, and others try to get out of the geography and to consider this region as if it is a part of Europe or America, despite that the history of this region is not Europe and America, where certain specificities are being imposed to have both all parties really as one. All these alibis that they are really saying really result in the concordance of everyone. It is not in the interest of all parties to really be imposing in their own perspective. As for the stability and security and development as well is a condition of the civil state. In case of civil war and interferences from so many countries, we cannot really establish a true civil state or any system that guarantees stability. Palestine, it is really sad what's going on, but Palestine is like this since 48. The Palestinian people is fighting since then to really have their independence. But this fighting and what's going on in Palestine are not an alibi for other countries. Back at the time, there were certain slogans, and the rights of some Arab countries have been really cancelled completely to really save Palestine. Palestine have been taken really as an alibi to really hinder development in so many other countries. This is not really justified. What is the relationship of Palestine and the stability of Tunisia and other countries? Can we find a civil state and find development, and the Gulf countries have really achieved development without avoiding their own duties towards the Palestinian cause. Yes, stability is of vital importance. Any civil state cannot be established without stability.
شكرا لك الأستاذ راشد على المحاضرة القيمة.
Thank you, Mr. Rashid. Hadi Al-Hajri, the ambassador of Qatar in the UAE. The Gulf countries, are they really ready to establish a civil state as mentioned by yourself? Second question. How do you see the countries after the revolutions that we've seen and developments that occurred in the Arabic countries? Thank you.
شكرا سعادة السفير.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The Gulf countries, in my own opinion, are achieving most of the conditions of the civil state, or perhaps all the conditions, but really, indeed, they are really achieving most of the conditions. Rule of law is very strong, inequality between citizens, social peace, despite the presence of differences. All Gulf countries cannot be put in one basket, but in general, they are achieving most of the conditions of the civil state, along with the differences between one country to another. Your question, Your Excellency, of what is going on today and what are the results. I mentioned in my own presentation that the Arabs have lost the third opportunity that should have allowed the establishment of civil states. Until now, opportunities are lost. We hope that the Arabic region or Arabic nations will witness a stability that might result in development, establishment of institutions that adopt civil states. Hopefully.
مرحبا داني بوبشارة.
Dani Bouchara from Lebanon. Before talking about the civil state, we as Arabs, we are far from what is called the country. We are really linked to the village, our own parties. The idea of the country or the state, this idea comes from the Europe or America. We haven't really established or understood the idea of the state. And how will we do that when it comes to civil state? From the 18th and 19th century, the idea of the country was a dream for the Lebanese. We tried, as a Lebanese experience by constitution, try not to be anything, not east or west, not a religious ideological country, not to west, similar to the French Revolution, where it divided religion from the state. I learned in France and I saw that they forgot all religious values. They believed in secular state. We in Lebanon tried not to be a secular state completely and not be a country such as the other Arab countries based on religious ideology. In our constitution, we succeeded. The idea of Michel Chihau succeeded, but in experience, we failed. Why? Because those around us are stronger as ideas and peoples, those coming either from the east or from the west. We want this thing to happen, but there is a reality on the ground. Mankind is still really linked to a tribe and village. This is not bad, but the idea of the state needs long journey, long educational journey. Thank you. I agree with you that tribal aspect, all these are hindrances to the establishment of a civil state. Last question. Assalamu alaikum. Dr. Ali Al-Amoudi, Khabir BE, an environmental expert in sustainable development. You gave a comprehensive idea about the establishment of the civil state and the most important challenges around it. You mentioned the Gulf experience, especially the UAE. The UAE has really succeeded not only in the political experience and the civil state and the political ingredients all over the world, in so many aspects where the world really witnessed that. Isn't it time? Isn't it time for the Arabic and Islamic worlds where all the components of the civil state are there? Isn't it time for them to take the basics of the Emirati experience, which proved for the world that it is developed, that it is human rights and it works for comprehensive development and so on and so forth? Thank you. Thank you. No doubt that the Emirati experience is considered the most prominent, most successful and sustainable, not only in the Middle East, but all over the world. The Emirati experience is a federal experience. This is also more important. This is the only experience where the Arabs have succeeded in building a federation which is merged in a constant manner, in such a constant manner and firm manner, in addition to other successful aspects that you have mentioned. I think that I've really read last week a report from one of the research centers in Spain, if I'm not mistaken, which calls on the Arab countries to really follow the path of the UAE experience in building modern state. And this is pride and joy for us, of course, as Emiratis, that we have been able to really establish this experience. And I think that the success is great. Hopefully that they take this experience with taking, of course, the specificities of every Arabic countries alike. These successful experiences are learning definitely and should be followed. And hopefully we can in the UAE, and our children can really preserve the success and accomplishments, the true accomplishment which is there in the UAE, not only the economic development and the infrastructure, but the building of mankind. The Emiratis today are really supporting their country in the framework of what's going on. This is the main thing. Hopefully we can follow suit. Thank you. At the end of this seminar, I reiterate on behalf of Dr. Jamal Sanad Swaidi, Director General of the UAE for Research and Studies. Thank you for Mr. Rashid, and we invite you for dinner. Hoping that we meet in other seminars. Thank you.